I wanted to share a story with you about my cousin. My cousin was in death row in Huntsville, Texas for murder. He was been on there for about 10, 11 years. My mom used to drive from San Antonio all the time to visit him once a month, and she watched him go through his progressions of becoming Muslim, not believing in God, becoming into Wiccan, and then finally becoming a Christian. And then about 2006, she would keep me up to date on the stories of how he was doing, and he would do drawings and stuff like that. And in 2006, she called me one day and she said, Reese, she said, Richard asked if you would be his spiritual advisor because he finally got his date that he was going to be put to death in Huntsville. And I'm thinking, spiritual advisor? I mean, I don't want to be there with this guy on his last moment and watch him get put to death. But what do you say to a family member? No, I'm busy, or I'm not interested. And so I said, yeah, tell him I'll do it. And I kind of have a healthy perspective of death. If you become saved, if you've given your life to Christ, you would go to heaven. And so I said, well, I'll go give him his last rites and be his spiritual advisor. Well, I didn't know a clue or knew nothing about how to do that. So I was just praying about it. And so I found some things that I really felt like I wanted to do. And so that weekend was the weekend that I drove to Huntsville. And we went and we spent some time with him. You spend a day before a hand with him. And then you give him, you spend, as your spiritual advisor, you spend 30 minutes with him, giving him his last rites before he goes and he gets put to death. And so the first day I was with him, I was just getting caught up with him and talking to him. And as I was there, his ex-wife was there and his two children. And so I was sitting there talking to him, between the glass. You couldn't touch him or anything like that. We just had on the phones. And he said, Recie, he's like, would you mind performing a marriage and marrying me and my ex-wife before I get put to death? And I'm thinking, I've been a pastor and been ordained for 25 years. I've never performed a wedding. It was always the senior pastor or someone else doing it. And I was like, well, Richard, I've never performed a wedding, but he says, well, just make it up. So I'm like, we're gathered here today. It was hilarious, but I married him, and just to honor him before he was about to pass away. And I didn't realize the intense spiritual atmosphere and battle that went on with that whole thing. It was like most people, they walk into a place, but when you become spiritually attuned, you start paying attention to the pressures and to the warfare and all the different spiritual atmospheres that are going on in a place. And so that night I went to sleep and I had a dream. And in the dream, I saw Richard laying on the gurney, and I saw the warden there. I saw everybody. It's almost like I saw the whole scene. I was dreaming the scene. And as he was put to death, I saw coming out of the sky, I saw an angel come get Richard from his spirit and take him to heaven. So the next day, I go there and I'm spending some time with Richard, and he was thanking me for marrying him and his ex-wife, and we were just talking, and I said, Richard, I saw last night, I had a dream, and I said, I saw an angel come out of heaven and grab you and take you to heaven. And so he thought that was cool. And, you can only imagine what he was wrestling with. Here's a guy that's been in prison, hadn't been touched in 11 years by a human being, or haven't had touch. He was locked up 23 hours a day out of 24 hours. And so, he was just emotionally spent. And so we were all, it was his family, it was my mom, it was a priest, it was the warden. We were all just in this room. And this next part I'm about to share, it was so surreal. It's hard to even describe and to communicate to you of what happened. It was almost like I was watching a whole movie scene, because it was surreal. It was like, so here we are, we're all sitting in this room waiting for that time. And so the warden comes to me and he says, okay, it's time for the spiritual advisor to go and spend time with the with Richard. So I go in there, and this little old room. You've probably seen it on TV if you watched any of those shows. And he's in a cage right here, and I'm right here, and the guard is right behind me, and the other guard's right behind me, and I'm thinking, these guys won't give me any breathing room. I was kind of offended at first because I was like, I really wanted to do this right. And so I looked at him, I said, Richard, I said, you're going to have to come clean. I said, because the cross is not going to help you on the other side. The cross was meant for this side of eternity. And so Richard, he confessed to me, he came clean, he repented of his sins. And then I had a list that I walked him through of breaking every curse off of him and his family line so that it wouldn't go through and affect his children and his grandchildren one day. So I just methodically went through that with the Holy Spirit, and it was just powerful. And they let me do something that afterwards the guards told me, and even other spiritual advisors, they told me two things afterwards. They said, it's interesting that you're allowed to give spiritual last rites to Richard, and he's your cousin. They don't let spiritual advisors be a family member. And the second thing that they don't do is they don't let you touch the inmate. And this lady's been doing it for 30 years there, and she says, you're a family member and they're letting you do it. I don't know how you got past that. The second thing is I was able to anoint him with oil. They opened up, the guard opened up the cage. I anointed his head and I anointed his feet with oil. And I thought that was pretty powerful because they said they just don't do that. So evidently God was doing something very special here. And so I went through all of that. Then when I go back to that room, the tension's high. It's just, you can feel the atmosphere is just electric. And it hasn't rained in Houston for I think 2 months. And all of a sudden, it just started thundering. You could just hear thunder. And we're like, even some of the guards were looking, it's like, it's supposed to rain today? Like, we didn't have that in the forecast. And these big old, how the big drops hit the ground. And so the warden comes in and he screams out, it's time to go to the death chamber. I was like, my goodness. I mean, it was like a movie because he could have just said, hey, it's time, we're going to go over now. But he kind of announced it. And so here we are walking behind him, and you got these big old drops of rain hitting the pavement. Pow, pow. And one hit me on top of the head and made a lot of noise, but it was just coming. It was just so surreal. And so we're walking over to the death chamber, and so you have, the victim's family on this side that we can't see, and then we have us, our family. So they bring Richard in, or he's already there, and so they open up the curtains, and he's there. And he makes his comment, he apologizes to the victim's family, and he says a few things to his wife and to my mom, and then as soon as they injected him with the injection, and I'm not exaggerating, a bolt of lightning struck. It was just loud as can be outside. And I believe in my dream that's when the angel came and got him, picked him up and took him. And so, people were crying. I mean, he was just literally there, and he had Native American blood in him, and he wanted me to put his medicine bag on him. And he said no one was supposed to touch that bag but him, but a priest or a spiritual advisor. And he says, when I pass away, he says, I want you to put this on my body when they bury me. And so after they wheel everybody back to the room, and they grab me and they take me into this room, and I mean, he's just laying there like on just a white school table. And so he's there, and I put the necklace, his wishes of the medicine bag on him, and I go back to the room where everybody's at. And so I'm just sitting there, and I'm just kind of just like, that was intense. And so the warden walks in, and so I'm thinking he's going to address the family members, he's going to address, whoever, and he turns to me, he says, Pastor. And I said, yes, sir. And he's like, can I say something to you first? And I said, yes, sir, you can. He says, the guards want me to tell you that you forever changed their life. They've been doing this for 30 years, and you have to understand, this is what he's saying to me. You have to understand that these guys are hardened, callous guards. They've been seeing people been put to death for 30 years, and they've been watching spiritual advisors give last rites for 30 years. And they said they've never, ever seen anybody do it the way that you did it. And they said they want you to know that you've changed their life forever. And I was just like impacted. And I was just like, almost like tears just coming down my eyes, because I thought, what if I wouldn't have done this? What if I would have said, I don't want to do this. I don't know how to give spiritual, last rites to somebody. What if I would have done it? I could have missed an opportunity. But it was an honor and a privilege for me to be able to trust the Lord, that in that time and in that moment that he would direct me and give me directions of the right thing to do. And it changed these guards' life forever.